Hi, it's Sapphira. I'm back to read for Book Lovers Burlesque, and it's an honour to be reading another chapter from my own book, Burlesque or Bust. It's come out just a year ago, and today I'm in fact going to read You Gotta Get a Gimmick. You Gotta Get a Gimmick. Chapter 12. I started my business on a G-string budget. Moving back home with my parents was a humbling experience, but it gave me the chance to come full circle. I began looking for new locations to teach my dance classes in the area. I found myself pulled back to the ballet school, and to my surprise, Miss Ballerina was still teaching there. She was running the academy some 15 years later. We embraced each other with delight, and she remembered my name. It was a lovely sight to see her surrounded with ballet costumes in the middle of the studio, trying to sort the mismatching sets of tutus and their accompanying accessories. "These are from a show we did last night," she gushed enthusiastically. "Oh, it is so nice to see you. I do love hearing of our students growing up and going on to do amazing things." She shared with me her escapades, and I shared mine on the London burlesque scene. I gave her a poster from my own dance academy. It was a way of commemorating the knowledge of joy in performing that she'd passed on to me and I was passing on to others. She was beaming. "You know, we don't rent this space out for dance classes because we're owned by the council, but I have an idea. You should contact our music theatre group. They have a studio that is often unused and it's not far from here. In fact, the chap running it used to do lighting way back when you were a ballet student here." I hurried off with the number. I was intrigued when Mr. Musical answered the call. "You want to teach burlesque?" he said with a warm laugh. "Now that's mighty coincidental, because we're just about to put on a musical about a burlesque artist. Do you know the musical Gypsy?" Did I ever? Gypsy Rose Lee was one of the most famous burlesque strippers of yesteryear. I was blown away. I had started out in ballet at this small studio, and now 15 years later I'd travelled the world and returned to the same little block I grew up in. Here I was linking up with a theatre group putting on a burlesque show. What were the chances? I agreed to meet with Mr. Musical to see the space they rehearsed in as a potential to hire for my burlesque classes. During our meeting, another beautiful full circle moment occurred. "You know, we're actually in a bit of a jam with this show, Gypsy," said Mr. Musical. "To be a part of the show, we need someone who can commit to all the rehearsals, and someone just had to pull out. We need someone to play a singing stripper." I had to pinch myself. I had a special skill on the burlesque scene. I would perform a sing and fling. A phrase I originally thought I had coined, but I realized that burlesque and singers have been around for a long time, and probably someone had come up with that before me. I was one of the few performers on the scene who incorporated singing into their acts. In fact, some show producers would even ask me not to sing because they thought it didn't suit the burlesque style. That always perplexed me, because Gypsy Rose Lee herself, years before our burlesque revival, had made her mark using her voice. The spoken word was her signature performance style. Nonetheless, I was back in town, and suddenly my luck seemed to be changing. I told Mr. Musical I would love to be the singing stripper in Gypsy the Musical. A few days later, I found myself in front of the audition panel, and I got the part on the spot. It was the first time this had happened to me in my limited audition experience, but I knew it was a good sign. I could feel in my bones I was going to nail this role and play it with all my heart. I was given the role of the unforgettable Electra, the stripper who used lights in her costume as a gimmick. I was also thrilled to see the manuscript the famous songwriter Stephen Sondheim. You Gotta Get a Gimmick. It was awe-inspiring to read right at the bottom of the manuscript and see Gypsy Rose Lee there listed as a co-writer. Knowing my path was to cement my songwriting in the music industry, I felt touched that some 50 years earlier, another burlesque artist and writer had been on the same path, especially one as renowned as Gypsy Rose Lee. While I knew little of Gypsy becoming part of the musical, it became a chance for me to learn about her life intimately and into the world she'd lived in. She was originally in the shadow of her younger sister and had a pushy stage mother who was in many ways a frustrated artist in her own right. I realised the roots that had brought her to the burlesque world were so different to my own. I empathised with the fact the family had so much poverty, driving and travelling from theatre to theatre, living on a shoestring. This script had fallen into my hands and I felt it had found me, rather than the other way around. It made me think of all the other times I had come full circle. One particular instance sprang to mind as a young inspiring artist. I had worked jobs to be closer to my beloved art form. So at 19, I was an usher at the Regent Theatre, a job I cherished. I would sell the programs, and my favourite post would be at the top of the theatre where I would turn on a torch and guide patrons safely. This spot was fantastic because I would get to see the whole show every night and have a cosy place to sit. The top step was behind all the audience rows. Oh, I drank it in. The high ornate ceiling, the elaborate rows of plush red velvet chairs, and of course the performers. Deborah Byrne and Hugh Jackman were starring in Sunset Boulevard. Every night I would mouth the songs and lines silently from that top step, wishing it were me on stage. Many years later, that dream would come true as I auditioned for the famous Australia's Got Talent with my dance troupe. The auditions for Australia's Got Talent took place at one and the same Regent's Theatre. So standing on stage in front of a panel which included Danny Minogue was exhilarating and surreal. I thought of my psychiatric hospital episode and the moment on a delusion of grandeur, I thought I would be flown to meet Kylie Minogue. So now, standing here in front of her sister was a very beautiful moment and every hair stood on end. I looked into her eyes and sang a beautiful song. Although we were sadly buzzed off, I knew when we had finished that song that we had delivered a great performance. It was beautifully sung, Danny said. I wanted to make sure I said that. What a thing to hear! After everything it had taken to get there, I was in ecstasy. Even more exhilarating was peering right up to the back of the theatre where I had once sat, wistfully wishing I was a singer in a fancy costume. It was a profound moment and one I had to breathe in slowly. I was starting to realise my dream. Now, as I was playing the role of Electra in this great musical, I was able to put a lot of experience I had from stage and productions like Australia's Got Talent into practice. Even in the small cabaret venues and private parties I had been performing in, it had prepared me in some ways to be in a 14-run theatre show. As the opening night rolled around, the theatre company was abuzz. There were wardrobe fittings, extra rehearsals, and of course the production of the show's program. Remembering myself as a wistful usher dreaming about being up on stage, I was taken aback to see my own headshot in a program with a hugely talented cast. We were accompanied in this musical by a 19-piece orchestra and the big brass and percussion were electrifying. Oh, how I wished I could take them with me to every show. I'm just not sure how I would fit them on the back of my bike. It added such a dynamic energy to have the clash of cymbals, the toot of trumpets, the sweet sounds of the strings. The volume and timbre brought out the best performance in me. The scene I performed was backstage. A timid gypsy was thrust into the dressing room to meet her new co-workers. In fact, she found herself in the middle of a heated debate. A pair of veteran strippers, Tessitura and Mazeppa, were playfully arguing, but this struck a raw nerve. Although it was playful, it made me feel sad. The sad fact is it brought back some less joyful memories from my performance life, and they haunted me. Although I was committing my all to burlesque in order to help others, finding playful ways to combat mental health, I had experienced some mental health stresses on the path to becoming a more prominent artist. There were sadly darker forces at work in the entertainment field. A small faction of the burlesque community had been bullying and trying to destabilize me. As I had been working hard on noticing my own triggers, I was starting to see with an empathetic eye how others might also be triggered. I was recognizing they may not have the tools to unravel their emotional process. I always did my best to be firm and loving. I wanted to keep my boundaries in place, but in truth it was exhausting being the one at the top of the tree, always feeling like I had to keep my guard up to deflect jealous stabs and snipes. I think that as a strong female leader who was tapping into my prime sexual energy, I was evoking a lot of projections and negative reactions simply because of my skill with the media and my naked ambition. My goal was always to shine a light and help share an art form that had saved me. But to those who did not know me, I think I was misinterpreted and misunderstood. Now, on one hand, burlesque was a crutch to bring about my self-esteem and to help me after a mental health breakdown. On the other hand, it has taken all my emotional training and skills to stay grounded and stable, becoming a full-time businesswoman in the arts industry, especially amidst some challenging dynamics in a female-dominated world. My philosophy is focusing on positivity, and I choose to always try and see the best in others, but negative incidents happen to everyone, and I want to shine a light and speak up in order to inform young artists entering the industry. Bullying and sexual harassment can happen, and speak up if you notice happening to you. I have been sexually harassed by an inebriated lesbian bar owner at a show who buried her face in my bosoms and blew a raspberry into my cleavage to show off to her friends. It left me feeling violated, unsafe, and discriminated against by members of the gay community who questioned my sexuality and right to be within their environment. I was also the victim of financial duress when female business partners, who paid a male counterpart promptly to preserve their reputation, took 9 months to pay my invoice when I had invested savings into the business and he had not. After a sellout show, I waited 4 months to be paid by a club, and when I was finally invited to accept the payment, a wad of money was shaken just out of hand above my head and mocking to me. I felt they did this to belittle me. It was a harsh lesson in the cruelty facing women in business, particularly the more unscrupulous and less regulated entertainment industry. When I met Miss No, she was a prominent performer who was renowned within a provincial scene. With my corporate sway, I had a portfolio beautifully presented in an A3 folder. As we met to discuss the biz, I opened each page to show the press I'd secured in London, and although she smiled politely, I could see a serpentine flicker as her pupils narrowed to a slit. Her jealousy was palatable. Not only was her body language toxic, it was the stench on her breath that made me uneasy. It was a dank haze of vile gas. I recoiled, but foolishly ignored my impulses. And then, almost as if being pulled back to my dark past, I found myself later at a show with Miss No, and we were back in the dungeon-like cells of Club Danger. Miss No hissed at me heinously, her fierce physique and immovable form. "We don't want your positivity, Priscilla," she spat at me with stabbing staccato. I had a hard time speaking up for myself, and so I guess it was symbolic when I lost my voice for a year during this episode. Why the one space with its sinister jail-like rooms has been the location of 2 artistic crises, I will never understand. Thankfully, these incidents have outnumbered the sheer bliss and happy ones that I have felt when teaching a group of excited students or watching the post-show glow of my own dance troupe. Often when I watch my beginners, they come off stage to thunderous applause And it's just more than glitter, a student will say. It's more than that lights up the stage. Everybody's auras are glowing. From Paris to Dublin, Plymouth to Pune, I have been welcomed and encouraged, and that appreciation has kept me going through thick and thin. When, 4 years later, I finally succeeded in meeting my idol, Sir Richard Branson, in London, it was at a conference for business leaders. The emphasis was on creating change and developing and disrupting industry. I felt encouraged to hear Sir Richard speak of his own failures in business, and many other leaders stood up to openly share how they had also failed, and it was important to not let failure shake the spirit of young entrepreneurs. It became such an essential ingredient, they said, to achieving success. So I felt less ashamed about the failed Burlesque or Bust tour, which had nosedived, not to mention the difficulties I'd had as a single woman in business. In a way, the shame I felt about this failure was similar to the stigma I felt about speaking out about my bipolar episode. But the more I surrounded myself with like-minded people, the more I realized I wasn't alone. A lot of people had been through exactly the same thing. In this room of over 700 people, we all had similar stories to share. It was amazing to meet Richard Branson at that event, and I was grateful it was arranged by some very special people, because I worked hard with a crowdfunding poem to get my ticket to hear him speak. The end.